Hello, today I am going to be talking about the best nonfiction books I read in 2025. Now, unlike my video about the best fiction I read in 2025, this will not be a ranked, ordered list. This will just be in the order that I read them. I have 6 books to talk about. They are all biographies or autobiographies of some kind. I read a lot of those. I do read other kinds of nonfiction, but I'd say that's definitely the biggest type that I read. I really find those interesting. I love just learning in general, and I find history interesting, and I especially like learning about a person. Probably why I read more biographies than books about specific subjects, because I enjoy learning about a person, especially when it's from that person themselves, and some of these books are memoirs, so that's particularly interesting. I just find it interesting to learn a lot about one person, and also being interested in psychology, I pay attention to that, and I think we can learn a lot by studying other humans. All these books are standalones and I would say are targeted towards adults. Some of them are definitely more mature than others, but I'd say in general, these books are pretty mature. Like my top 10 fiction books, I will be saying some information about the book, like what year it was published, how many pages it was, or some of these I listen to audiobooks, so I'll say like about how long it was. Things like that. I think that information is fun to say and can be helpful for people watching. Some of these books I have reviews of on my channel, some I do not. If I do, I'll mention it when I get to that book. With all the books mentioned here that I did not do reviews of, I feel that I should have, and I think I am getting better at doing reviews of nonfiction books. Like sometimes I just wouldn't do that. And I know I don't have to do a review of every book I read, but looking back at it, I wish I did have reviews of those books, but I will have a chance to talk about them here. The first book I want to talk about is The Woman in Me by Britney Spears, her memoir that was released in 2023. I listened to an audiobook of this through Libby. It's about 6 hours long, and some of these memoirs were narrated by their author. This one was not. This one was read by Michelle Williams, although there is an introduction read by Britney Spears. I listened to this book in January of 2025, and I enjoyed it a lot. I mean, all these books I enjoyed a lot. I think I'm generally interested in a lot of memoirs and celebrity memoirs, especially when there's someone who's been through a lot in some kind of unique situation like she has been through. I like Britney Spears' music a bit. I mean, I have listened to all her albums, which is more than most people could say. I often like to try out every album, or at least a lot of the music by someone if I find them interesting enough. So I do like some of her songs, but I don't absolutely love her entire discography. I'm open to listening to some of the songs more, so she's not my absolute favorite artist at all, but I do like her and find her interesting. I didn't know a whole lot about her story and her situation. I remember hearing a few years ago about the Free Britney movement and how she was eventually out of her conservatorship, but I didn't even know what a conservatorship really was, and I didn't really know much about the situation. This book really helped me understand that and everything before that, leading up to it, and things afterwards as well. I definitely found this story really interesting. I listened to it pretty quickly. I think someone like Britney Spears definitely gets judged a lot by the public, and people make assumptions or judge her like negatively. So I think this book is a good opportunity to tell your own story on your own terms and in your own words. I thought it was interesting to hear explained why she reacted in certain ways, in certain situations, the way that she did, and it makes it really understandable, and I found myself quite sympathetic. I think it's especially interesting to hear the perspective of someone who was really famous and still is, but I mean like getting the kind of attention that she was and all the things she was doing at the time, especially being a young woman. This book goes a lot into her career, her family, her relationships, and I think it's inspirational as well. Definitely educated me on some things, and I think that a lot of people could benefit from reading this, especially if they're interested in her or are just familiar with her and are willing to read it. The next book I want to mention, and most of these biographies are music related, is Can I Say? Living Large, Cheating, Death, and Drums, Drums, Drums by Travis Barker. Published in 2015, this memoir by Blink-182's drummer was very interesting to me, especially as a really big fan of Blink-182. So I really enjoyed reading this. I read this in February. This paperback edition is 398 pages. There is an audiobook of it, though it is not narrated by the author, and I found this memoir particularly interesting in the way that it just looks and is formatted. Like, I'll show you some things. Like, I think it's just designed really cool. Like, there's these splatter designs throughout the book. There are a bunch of photos throughout the book. And like a lot of books, it has some color photos in the middle, but a lot of photos throughout that as well. It also has a bunch of sections throughout. Here's an example of one of them that are basically things that I guess people wrote or said to be put in the book. And there are a lot of these from a lot of people, like family members, bandmates, other people he's worked with, people like that. And so that was really interesting to hear their perspectives. So a bunch of those are just throughout the book. That's another really cool thing about it. Travis is definitely the quietest member of Blink-182, but this was definitely a good opportunity to hear a lot from him and learn more about him, which I enjoyed, and also learning about the music he's worked on and just his life. Like, he's been through quite a bit as well. And so I also found this very inspiring and motivating. Not only the things he's been through, but also how he's handled them and how he sees things now. This memoir is pretty intense at times, and it's very honest, which I appreciate. And yeah, definitely something I was really interested in and enjoyed reading, and I don't think I was ever really bored while reading it, so this was a fun time. Next is another book that I listened to an audiobook of. This one I borrowed from Hoopla. I think it was the last title I borrowed from Hoopla before my county discontinued their services with them, which I believe they've been doing with a lot of counties, unfortunately, but at least I still have access to Libby. And that is Autism and Heels, The Untold Story of a Female Life on the Spectrum by Jennifer Cook O'Toole, now just Jennifer Cook. Jennifer Cook I am familiar with as the relationship coach on the American Love on the Spectrum. I've seen both and I really like both, but I really enjoyed her on the show, and she's written a few books. This is basically like a memoir, but also sort of information about autism, especially from a female perspective. It is kind of all over the place, but I still enjoyed it and enjoyed listening to the information I heard. This one is narrated by the author, so that was a pretty cool experience. I definitely resonated with a lot of what she said and liked the way that she said and worded some things. And I think this book could be very educational and useful for a lot of other people as well. I do feel like this book doesn't really go exactly in order of her life and the things that happened in it. Like, she could be talking about her childhood and then be talking about being a parent and then kind of back to her childhood. And yeah, it is a little all over the place, as I said. But I think such is the autistic experience. And I think overall I wouldn't say poorly written. I got used to it after some time. So it's not really the kind of book where everything is perfectly in order, but I was fine with it, but I do see how that could be jarring to some. And I mean, things are in sections. So this book was published in 2018. The audiobook is about 12 and a half hours long. I listened to it in March and April. Very good and informative. I really enjoyed hearing from her and saw a lot of myself in it. So the fourth book, Back to the Blink-182 Memoirs, is Fahrenheit 182 by Mark Hoppus. This was just released last year, and I read it in April when it came out. I read this in 3 days, which is very quick for me. It's 391 pages. I also listened to the audiobook of this, which is something I rarely do, both reading a physical book and listening to the audiobook, but I did that and really enjoyed that experience. I did that because I wanted that experience. The audiobook is about 7 hours long. I do have a review of this on my channel if you want to hear more information, and the audiobook was narrated by the author. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have wanted to listen to the audiobook as well, but I'm glad that it was. I really enjoyed that experience. I think that made it even better. And I am open to doing, I guess, what people call immersive reading, where you read a physical book and listen to the audiobook at the same time. So I may do that again in the future. I just really wanted that with this because I knew I'd be interested in doing it that way. So again, as a big fan of Blink-182, I found this particularly interesting. And this is 10 years later after Travis's memoir, so there's like even more information to go over. Similarly to Travis's, you know, it starts like in his childhood and pretty much just goes over his career up until this point. Very much about his relationships, struggles with mental health, things he did in his career, band drama, other personal stories. There are also a lot of photos throughout this one. This one doesn't have the perspectives from other people, but that's okay. Most memoirs don't have that, but this one did also have a lot of photos throughout it. This one doesn't have like a little section for photos in the middle of it, but there are a bunch of black and white photos throughout it. And in the back, there are little photo captions because there aren't actually any captions where the photos are, but it has the page number that they're on and a little caption to go with them that seem to be written by Mark because some of them are kind of humorous or informal. So that was a nice touch. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was entertaining, interesting, funny, emotional, motivating, inspiring. It also goes over more recently being diagnosed with cancer and going through and overcoming that. This was really fun to me, and I would say my favorite book of all the nonfiction I read in 2025. The next book I want to mention is Bottom of the Pyramid, a memoir of persevering, dancing for myself, and starring in my own life by Nia Su, former star on the reality TV show Dance Moms and the cast member of the original cast to be on the show for the longest amount of time. She was on the show for most of its duration. This memoir was also just published in 2025. I didn't read it on release date. I borrowed an audiobook from Libby, which is narrated by the author. and it was about 6 hours long. I read it in November and December. I also have a review of this on my channel if you want to hear more information about it. But I found this pretty interesting, being interested in dance myself and getting the perspective of someone who I have seen. Like, I haven't seen all of the show, but I've seen some of it, enough to be familiar with it and to be familiar with the original cast and some of the other people on the show. It was really interesting hearing her perspective with such a confident and positive attitude about what she went through as a child on a reality TV show, how that affected her personal life, her mental health, her family life, and how she overcame a lot of the doubt and insecurity that she developed as a result of being on the show, and what she's done since then, and a lot of the opportunities she's had, and what her life is like now. And she says a lot of things that she learned that I think could be beneficial for anyone to hear, even if they were never in her situation. Yeah, this was pretty interesting to learn more about her. I really like her attitude and her perspective, and to get a lot of behind-the-scenes looks of the show. The last book I want to mention is the only one of these that is a biography and not a memoir, and that is Yoko by David Sheff, a biography about Yoko Ono. Technically, I started reading this in November of 2025 and did not finish it until January 2026, but I'm still going to include it in the video. This was published in 2025. This hardcover edition is about 291 pages. There are notes in the back that take up a lot of the book, so the book is actually a bit shorter than it looks unless you want to go through all the notes, which are basically just like saying like what interview a quote is from and things like that, so I didn't read those. I read everything else in a book, like a preface, introduction, epilogue, typically the acknowledgments, but the notes not so much, just kind of looked through those. There is also a prologue and introduction, and the pages in those aren't numbered, so it's probably about 300 pages ultimately. I have a review of this on my channel as well, and I really enjoyed this. I didn't know much in this book, but I really enjoyed learning more about Yoko. This book pretty much goes over all of her long life up until this point, and the different kinds of art and work she did. Like, she not only did music, but also like art that would be in a gallery or that's performed, and there were some books. She did a lot. She has definitely been through, overcome, and accomplished a lot, and I found it really interesting, especially since her work is very unique and not everyone understands it and it's not appealing to everyone. I think that this book did a good job at explaining what some of the work means, why it sounds or looks the way it does, and I also just found it interesting to learn more about her as a person and her beliefs and ideas, and I resonated and agreed with some of that. And I found this very interesting also just as a fan of the Beatles, just to learn about that history too. But this book is split into 3 parts, pretty much like before she meets John Lennon, and then their life together, and then her life after his death. So it's very much focused on her, but I found it pretty interesting. There's a lot of history in this. As you can tell, I just love music and art and learning more about it, and I especially love getting people's perspectives, which is one of the whole points of reading, and understanding things and people better. So those were my favorite nonfiction books I read in 2025. I really look forward to seeing what I will read in 2026 that I will enjoy the most. Of course, I'll make videos about those. For the best books I read in 2024, I just talked about fiction, but I think I could definitely make both fiction and nonfiction videos for each year. If you've read any of these books or have any thoughts you'd like to share about any of the people I talked about in this video, please feel free to discuss that in the comments. If you want, you can let me know your favorite nonfiction books that you read in 2025, and thank you for watching.